The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Kethavel walked through them, her blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights. Her ceremonial robe swept behind her as she made her way to the Zarathian Empire's section of the Great Assembly Hall. The chamber was enormous. It could hold representatives from all 847 species that belonged to the Galactic Council. Today, like most days, it was nearly full. Beings of every shape and size filled the curved rows of seats. Some looked almost human, while others were so alien that even seasoned diplomats still stared. Kethavel had been coming to these meetings for 40 years. She knew where everyone sat. The proud Valorians with their golden armor took up 3 full sections. The crystalline consortium members sat in special heated areas, their crystal bodies needing warmth to function properly. The gas-breathing ethereal collective floated in their protective bubbles near the ceiling, and there, in the very back corner, sat the human. Dr. Sarah Chen sat alone in the observer section. She always sat alone. For 15 years, she had come to every single council meeting. For 15 years, she had never spoken a word. Kethavel remembered when humans first arrived at the council. It was meant to be a kind gesture. Earth had just discovered faster-than-light travel, though barely. Their ships were slow and clunky compared to everyone else's. The council decided to give them observer status as a welcome gift to the galaxy. Most species got full membership after proving themselves. Humans just got permission to watch. Dr. Chen pulled out her tablet and placed it on the small desk in front of her. It was a primitive thing by galactic standards. Most council members used devices that projected images directly into their minds. Dr. Chen used a flat screen and touched it with a plastic stick. The Secretary General called the meeting to order. Today's agenda was typical: trade disputes, mining rights, and territorial boundaries. The Valorian delegate stood first, his golden armor catching the light. The Empire requests exclusive mining rights to the Deltara system, he announced. His voice boomed across the chamber. Our surveys show rich deposits of quantum crystals. A chorus of objections rose from other sections. The crystalline consortium representative's voice chimed like breaking glass. The consortium discovered those deposits first. We have prior claim. The argument went on for an hour. Dr. Chen wrote notes on her tablet the entire time. She never looked up, never reacted to anything that was said. Her hand moved steadily across the screen. When the Deltara issue was finally resolved, the Secretary General moved to the next item. Resource allocation for the Outer Rim colonies, they announced. This topic always brought complaints. The Outer Rim was where newer species lived, those not quite ready for full council membership. They needed food, medical supplies, and protection from raiders. Why do we waste resources on primitives? Asked the Ethereal Collective's speaker. Their voice came from everywhere and nowhere, as if the air itself was talking. Some species will never advance beyond basic civilization. Several delegates nodded in agreement. The Valorian representative stood again. We should focus our resources on species that matter, those that contribute to galactic progress, Dr. Chen continued writing. She had heard this argument many times before. Speaking of primitives, said another Valorian delegate, turning to look directly at Dr. Chen. When will the humans finally contribute something to these discussions? They've been silent for 15 years. Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Dr. Chen kept writing. Perhaps they don't understand our language, suggested a crystalline member. Their translation technology is rather basic. Or perhaps they simply have nothing to say, added an ethereal. Some species reach their maximum development very quickly. Dr. Chen's hand never paused. She wrote steadily, occasionally turning to a new page on her tablet. Kethavel felt uncomfortable with the mocking tone. She had always believed in treating all species with respect. But she had to admit the humans were puzzling. Why send a representative who never participated? The discussion moved to military matters. Pirate raids were increasing in several sectors. The Council's defense fleet needed more ships and personnel. Each member species should contribute according to their abilities, the Secretary General announced. We need volunteers for patrol duty. Species after species pledged ships and crew. The Valorians offered a full battle group. The Crystalline Consortium promised support vessels. Even smaller species contributed what they could. When all others had spoken, the Secretary General's gaze fell on the human section. Earth's contribution? The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to Dr. Chen. She looked up from her tablet for just a moment, meeting the Secretary General's gaze. Then she returned to her writing without saying a word. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, the Secretary General cleared their throat. Very well. Moving on to the next item. More laughter followed, quieter this time but still audible. Dr. Chen seemed not to notice. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. They discussed trade agreements, scientific exchanges, and cultural programs. Dr. Chen wrote through all of it. When delegates made jokes about primitive species or backward civilizations, she showed no reaction. When they specifically mentioned humans, she kept writing. As the session ended, delegates began filing out in groups. They chatted about the day's decisions and made plans for dinner. Dr. Chen packed her tablet carefully into a simple bag. She stood and walked toward the exit alone. Kethavel watched her go. The human moved with quiet dignity, never hurrying, never looking around at the other delegates. She wondered what Dr. Chen wrote about during these long meetings. Notes about council decisions? Observations about other species? Or was she perhaps writing personal letters to pass the time? Near the exit, Kethavel overheard a conversation between 2 Valorian officers. 15 years of silence, one was saying. Why do they even bother sending someone? Pride, probably, replied the other. Some species can't accept their limitations. They want to pretend they belong with advanced civilizations. Their ships can barely reach other star systems, the first officer continued. And their weapons technology is centuries behind ours. They use projectile weapons that fire metal bullets. Both officers laughed. Metal bullets! Can you imagine? Our shields don't even register such primitive attacks. Dr. Chen passed close enough to hear these comments. She walked by without changing expression, without slowing down, without acknowledging them at all. Kethavel found herself following the human toward the exit. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps curiosity about this strange, silent delegate who had become part of the council's routine. In the corridor outside the chamber, Dr. Chen stopped at a viewing window. The window looked out into space, showing the council station's beautiful location among 3 colorful nebulae. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the stars. Kethavel approached slowly. Dr. Chen? The human turned. Up close, Kethavel could see that Dr. Chen was older than she had appeared from across the chamber. There were lines around her eyes and gray in her black hair. I wanted to say, Kethavel began carefully, that not everyone finds humor in the comments about your species. Dr. Chen studied her for a moment. Thank you, she said quietly. Her English was perfect, though she spoke with a slight accent that Kethavel couldn't identify. May I ask, Kethavel continued, why you never speak during the sessions? Dr. Chen looked back out the window at the stars. We're still learning, she said simply. Learning what? Dr. Chen was quiet for so long that Kethavel thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, the human spoke. How the galaxy works. With that, Dr. Chen nodded politely and walked away toward the docking bays where her ship waited. Kethavel watched her go, more puzzled than ever. The next day, Dr. Chen would return to her seat in the observer section. She would take out her tablet and begin writing. And the galaxy would continue to ignore the silent human who watched everything and said nothing. None of them realized that Earth was learning much more than they knew. The emergency alert echoed through every ship, station, and colony in council space. Red lights flashed in the great assembly chamber as delegates rushed to their seats. Some arrived still wearing sleeping clothes. Others came directly from their ships still in travel gear. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived exactly on time, as always. She took her seat in the observer section, placed her tablet on the desk, and began writing. Around her, the chamber buzzed with worried conversations in dozens of languages. The Secretary General looked exhausted. Dark circles under their eyes showed they had been awake for days. The council is now in emergency session, they announced. We have received disturbing reports from the outer rim. The main display activated, showing a star map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of conflict. There were many more red zones than usual. The hegemony of Keth has begun aggressive expansion beyond their borders. The Secretary General continued. They have attacked 17 neutral systems in the past month. 3 of those systems have fallen completely. Worried murmurs filled the chamber. The Keth were known to be aggressive, but they had stayed within their own territory for decades. This level of expansion meant war. General Thaxon of the Cathari Defense Force stood up. His reptilian features were grim. The situation is worse than reported, he said. Keth forces are using biological weapons. They're not just conquering planets. They're making them uninhabitable for anyone except themselves. The display changed to show images from the attacked worlds. Cities lay in ruins. Plants and animals were dead or mutated beyond recognition. The few survivors wore protective suits and lived in sealed shelters. This is genocide, whispered a crystalline representative. They're destroying entire ecosystems. We must act quickly, declared the Valorian military commander. Every day we delay, more worlds fall to their poison. The Secretary General nodded gravely. We are calling for the formation of a defense coalition. All member species must contribute ships, personnel, and resources to stop the Keth advance. One by one, delegates stood to pledge their support. The Valorians offered their most advanced battle cruisers. The Crystalline Consortium promised their healing ships to help victims of biological weapons. The Ethereal Collective would provide their best pilots and navigators. Even smaller species made generous offers. The insectoid hive mind pledged their entire scout fleet. The aquatic depth dwellers offered their underwater assault specialists. Species after species stood and promised to fight. Dr. Chen continued writing on her tablet throughout all the pledges. Her hand moved steadily across the screen, recording everything. When the initial round of volunteers finished, the Secretary General consulted their list. We still need more support, they announced. This will require the largest military force in galactic history. General Thaxon stood again. Perhaps it's time for our observer species to finally contribute something meaningful. He turned to look directly at Dr. Chen. The humans have been watching our deliberations for 15 years. Surely they can offer some assistance? The chamber fell quiet. All eyes turned to the human section. Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet, meeting General Thaxon's gaze. For a moment it seemed like she might speak. Instead, she returned to her writing without a word. The silence stretched uncomfortably. General Thaxon's expression grew annoyed. Well, he demanded, will Earth contribute to the defense of galactic civilization? Dr. Chen continued writing. She didn't look up again. Unbelievable, muttered a Valorian delegate. Even when genocide threatens the galaxy, they remain silent. What could they contribute anyway? Asked another voice. Their ships are so slow that the war would be over before they arrived. Laughter began to spread through the chamber. Not the polite chuckling from previous meetings, but harsher, more bitter laughter. Perhaps the humans could contribute their ancient combustion rockets, General Thaxon said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Or maybe their primitive kinetic weapons. I'm sure their wooden clubs would terrify the Keth. The laughter grew louder. Delegates who were normally respectful began making their own jokes. Do humans even have a military? Asked an ethereal representative. We've never seen evidence of one. Maybe they could throw rocks at the enemy ships, suggested a crystalline member. Very large rocks. Or they could use their projectile weapons, added a Valorian officer. I hear human bullets bounce off modern shields like raindrops. Dr. Chen's hand never paused in its writing. She showed no reaction to the mockery surrounding her. The jokes grew crueler. Someone suggested that humans could serve as messengers, since their ships were too slow for combat. Another delegate wondered if humans could at least provide food for the coalition forces. Primitive rations for a primitive species contribution. General Thaxon raised his hand for silence. Perhaps we're being unfair, he said with false sincerity. Maybe humans have advanced beyond what we assume. Dr. Chen, would you care to enlighten us about Earth's military capabilities? Every delegate leaned forward, waiting for an answer. Dr. Chen looked up once more, her expression calm and unchanged. She met General Thaxon's eyes for several seconds. Then she returned to her tablet without speaking. There's your answer, General Thaxon announced. Earth has nothing to offer. The mockery resumed, worse than before. Delegates competed to make the most insulting comments about human primitiveness. Someone suggested that humans were probably still discovering fire. Another wondered if they had developed the wheel yet. Through it all, Dr. Chen wrote steadily on her tablet. Her face showed no emotion, no hurt, no anger. She simply recorded everything with mechanical precision. The coalition planning continued around the human section. Military officers discussed ship deployments and battle strategies. Scientists shared information about Keth biological weapons. Diplomats argued about refugee placement and supply lines. Dr. Chen wrote through all of it. When delegates made decisions, she noted them down. When they argued about tactics, she recorded the details. When they discussed classified military information, she captured every word. As the emergency session stretched into its 8th hour, exhaustion began to show on many faces. The Keth threat was real and immediate. 3 more worlds had fallen while they debated. Billions of lives hung in the balance. "We need to finalize the coalition structure," the Secretary General announced. "Time is running out." The final military command was established without any human input. Battle plans were approved without consulting Earth. Resource allocation was decided without considering any contribution from humanity. Dr. Chen documented everything. Her tablet now contained complete records of the galaxy's military structure, command hierarchy, battle plans, and strategic thinking. She wrote down the names of key officers, the locations of major fleet bases, and the capabilities of each species' military forces. When the session finally ended, delegates filed out in small groups. They discussed logistics, worried about the coming war, and made final preparations for departure to their home systems. Dr. Chen packed her tablet carefully and stood to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she passed a group of Valorian officers deep in conversation. "At least we know who our real allies are," one was saying. "When civilization itself is threatened, the worthy species step forward, and the unworthy reveal themselves through silence," replied another. "Earth has shown its true nature today. 15 years of watching, and when the galaxy needs help, they offer nothing," added a third officer. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider their observer status." Dr. Chen walked past them without changing her pace or expression. In the corridor, she stopped at the same viewing window where she had spoken with Kethavel months earlier. The stars looked the same as always, beautiful and distant. But now they were threatened by an enemy that used poison to kill entire worlds. The galaxy was mobilizing for the largest war in its history, and Earth remained silent. Dr. Chen stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the nebulae. Her tablet remained in her bag, her note-taking finally finished for the day. Tomorrow she would return to her seat and resume writing. The galaxy would continue to ignore her, especially now that they believed humans had nothing to offer. None of them wondered what Earth might be doing while their representatives sat silently in council chambers. None of them considered that 15 years of detailed notes might serve a purpose beyond simple record-keeping. The coalition would launch their defense without human help. They would face the Keth threat with the best ships, weapons, and soldiers the galaxy could provide. And Dr. Chen would be there to document everything that happened next. The war was going badly. Everyone in the council chamber knew it, though few wanted to speak the truth aloud. 3 more core worlds had fallen to the Keth hegemony in just 2 weeks. The coalition's best fleets had been scattered or destroyed. Billions of refugees fled deeper into council space, carrying stories of horror that grew worse each day. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her usual seat, writing on her tablet as emergency reports poured in. Around her, the greatest military minds in the galaxy struggled to find solutions to an impossible problem. "Kepler's world is completely lost," reported Admiral Zex of the Valorian Navy. His golden armor was dented and scorched from recent battles. "The Keth biological weapons have made the entire planet uninhabitable. We evacuated less than 10% of the population." Gasps of horror echoed through the chamber. Kepler's world had been home to 3 billion people. It was one of the oldest colonies in council space, a center of art and learning that had stood for thousands of years. "The same toxins are spreading to nearby systems," Admiral Zex continued. "Our scientists can't find a way to neutralize them. Every world the Keth touch becomes a dead zone." The Secretary General looked older than ever. "What about our counterattacks? The raids on Keth supply lines?" "Failed," admitted General Thaxon. His reptilian face showed deep exhaustion. "We lost half our strike force in the last attempt. Their defenses are too strong and their weapons too advanced. We're fighting with swords against enemies with plasma cannons." Dr. Chen's stylus moved steadily across her tablet screen. She recorded every detail of the military failures, every confession of weakness, every admission of desperation. "We need new strategies," declared the Ethereal Collective's war coordinator. "Conventional tactics aren't working." "What about unconventional tactics?" asked a crystalline general. "Chemical weapons? Biological warfare?" The suggestion created an uproar. Several species objected immediately. The Council had banned such weapons centuries ago after seeing their terrible effects. "We cannot become like the Keth," insisted the Secretary General. "If we use their methods, we lose our moral authority." "Moral authority won't save our worlds," General Thaxon shot back. "We're losing this war. In 6 months, the Keth will reach the core systems. In a year, they could control half the galaxy." The argument continued for hours. Some delegates wanted to use planet-killing weapons. Others proposed surrender negotiations. A few suggested evacuating entire sectors and leaving them to the Keth. Through it all, Dr. Chen wrote. Her tablet now contained detailed records of every military failure, every strategic mistake, and every tactical weakness the coalition had revealed. As the day wore on, frustration in the chamber grew sharper. Delegates snapped at each other. Old political rivalries surfaced despite the crisis. The unity of the early war days was cracking under the pressure of constant defeat. Councillor Zephyr of the Avian Confederacy had been silent for most of the session. His feathered crest was flat against his head, showing stress and anger. Finally, he stood up abruptly. "This is pointless," he announced, his voice cutting through the arguments. "We're debating tactics while our worlds burn. We're analyzing strategies while millions die." Other delegates turned to listen. Councillor Zephyr was known for his calm wisdom. If he was angry, the situation was truly desperate. "We need help," Zephyr continued. "We need allies we haven't considered. We need resources we haven't tapped." He looked around the chamber, his eyes finally settling on the human section. "Perhaps now would be an excellent time for our observers to finally speak up," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh wait, I forgot. You'd need to evolve actual intelligence first." Dr. Chen's stylus paused for just a moment, then resumed its movement. "Maybe in another 1,000,000 years, Zephyr continued, his voice getting louder. "You primitive apes might develop something resembling a thought. Until then, why don't you just sit there and pretend to understand what real civilizations are discussing?" The chamber erupted in laughter, not the uncomfortable chuckling of previous sessions, but loud, cruel laughter, born of frustration and desperation. Delegates who had lost friends and fleets vented their anger on the silent human. "At least when we're all dead," called out a crystalline representative, "the humans can inherit our ruins. They're probably better suited to living in rubble anyway." More laughter. The jokes grew nastier. "Assuming they can figure out how to work our technology," added a Valorian officer. "They'll probably try to bang rocks together to activate our computers. Maybe they'll discover fire while exploring our abandoned cities," suggested another voice. "Fire might be too advanced for them," someone else called out. "They'll probably spend centuries trying to figure out what those glowing things in our light fixtures are." The mockery continued to build. Delegates competed to make the cruelest comments. Someone suggested that humans might worship the abandoned technology as magic. Another voice wondered if they could even survive in space without their primitive life support systems. Dr. Chen continued writing through all of it. Her expression never changed. Her hand never paused. She recorded every insult, every laugh, every cruel joke about her species. "What are you even writing in that primitive tablet?" shouted Councillor Zephyr. "Shopping lists? Love letters to your pet rocks? Or are you drawing pictures because your species hasn't invented writing yet?" The laughter reached a peak. Even species that normally showed respect for others joined in the mockery. The stress of losing the war had broken their diplomatic restraint. "I bet she's taking notes about how real civilizations work," called a Valorian delegate, "so she can go back to Earth and teach the other apes how to use tools." "Tools might be too complicated," replied another voice. "Maybe she's just making marks to show she was here, like cave paintings." Dr. Chen's stylus stopped moving. The laughter continued around her, but something had changed. For the first time in 15 years, Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet during an active session. She looked directly at Councillor Zephyr. Her gaze was calm and steady. Gradually, delegates noticed her attention had shifted. The laughter began to fade as more beings realized the human was actually looking at them. When complete silence finally fell over the chamber, Dr. Chen stood up slowly. Her tablet remained open on the desk, stylus still in her hand. "The United Earth Coalition," she said in perfect galactic standard, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "hereby withdraws its observer status from this council." Effective immediately, the silence was absolute. Not one delegate moved or spoke. Dr. Chen closed her tablet with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo through the chamber. "We wish you luck in your current crisis." She placed the tablet in her bag and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were the only sound in the enormous room. Every eye followed her movement. As she reached the chamber doors, Dr. Chen paused and turned back one final time. Her gaze swept across the assembly, taking in all the species that had mocked her, all the delegates who had laughed at humanity's silence. "Oh, and Counselor Zephyr?" she said, her voice still calm and professional. The avian delegate stared at her, his feathered crest now fully erect in surprise and fear. "Those weren't notes I was taking all these years," Dr. Chen said. "They were tactical assessments." She turned and walked through the doors. They closed behind her with a soft hiss that sounded like a final breath. The chamber remained silent for long minutes after she left. Delegates stared at each other, trying to process what had just happened. The human observer, silent for 15 years, had finally spoken, and her words had changed everything. Counselor Zephyr slowly sank back into his seat, his crest flat against his head once more. Around him, other delegates began to whisper among themselves. What did tactical assessments mean? What had the human been recording all these years? The Secretary General called for order, but their voice shook. The war against the Kith suddenly seemed like a smaller problem compared to the implications of Dr. Chen's final words. Outside the chamber, Dr. Chen walked toward the docking bays where her ship waited. She moved with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. But now, for the first time in 15 years, she was no longer taking notes. Earth's observation period was over. 3 days after Dr. Chen's departure, the first reports began to arrive. They came from long-range sensor stations scattered throughout the galaxy, all reporting the same impossible readings from the Sol system. Captain Vex Khan of the Valorian Deep Space Monitoring Corps stared at his instruments in disbelief. He had been watching human space for years as part of routine border surveillance. Earth's system had always been quiet. A few dozen primitive ships moving slowly between planets. Nothing more interesting than cargo runs and planetary shuttles. Now his sensors were going insane. "Computer, verify sensor readings," he commanded. Sensors operating within normal parameters, the ship's AI responded. Energy signatures confirmed. Mass displacement readings confirmed. Quantum distortion patterns confirmed. Captain Vex Khan studied the data again. According to his instruments, massive structures were emerging from what had appeared to be empty space throughout the Sol system. Not just emerging, uncloaking. These weren't new constructions. They had been hidden all along. "Communications, get me Central Command immediately," he ordered. The response came within minutes. "Captain, you're ordered to maintain position and continue monitoring. Do not approach the Sol system under any circumstances." More reports flooded in from other monitoring stations. The human fleet that the galaxy had known about, perhaps 24 small vessels, was revealed to be nothing more than a diplomatic escort. From Earth's moon, from Mars, from the asteroid belt, and from hidden bases throughout the outer planets, the true human fleet was revealing itself. At the Galactic Council's Intelligence Center, Admiral Korath Prime of the Crystalline Consortium stood before a wall of displays showing sensor data from across the galaxy. Each screen told the same story. Humanity had been hiding a massive military presence. How is this possible? Demanded General Thaxon, who had arrived as soon as the reports reached him. Our sensors should have detected any large-scale construction. Not if they built everything inside asteroids and planetary bodies, Admiral Korath Prime replied. Her crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. Look at these readings from the asteroid belt. What we thought were natural rocks were actually camouflaged shipyards. The displays showed structures emerging from dozens of asteroids. Each one was huge, larger than the biggest space stations the Council had ever built. As their camouflage fields dropped, the true scope of human industry became visible. They've been building for decades, Admiral Korath Prime continued. Maybe longer. This isn't something they put together recently. This is a long-term project. General Thaxon studied the images with growing alarm. What about their technology? Our assessments showed they were centuries behind us. Our assessments were wrong, the Admiral replied grimly, or deliberately misled. On the main display, the first human warships became fully visible. They were massive, each one dwarfing the largest Council dreadnoughts. But their size wasn't what frightened the watching officers. It was the technology they displayed. The ships moved without any visible propulsion. They simply existed in one location, then existed somewhere else. Space itself seemed to bend around them, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy readings don't match any known physics, reported a technician. These vessels are manipulating space-time itself. Within hours, human fleets appeared simultaneously in 17 different star systems. All of them were deep inside Keth hegemony territory. There had been no travel time, no fleet movements detected by border sensors. The humans had simply arrived. The first engagement was monitored by an automated observation post in the Keth-controlled Sigma Draconis system. The recording would later become the most studied military footage in galactic history. A Keth battle fleet of 300 ships patrolled the system. They were the same vessels that had been terrorizing the galaxy for months. Massive bioships covered in living armor and armed with weapons that could poison entire worlds. The human fleet arrived without warning. 17 ships materialized in perfect formation. They were smooth and silver, reflecting the system's star-like mirrors. No weapons were visible on their hulls. No shields glowed around them. They simply hung in space, silent and still. The Keth fleet immediately opened fire. Streams of biological acid and viral torpedoes streaked across space toward the human ships. Any normal vessel would have been dissolved or infected within seconds. The attacks never reached their targets. The recording showed the Keth weapons simply stopping in mid-flight, as if they had hit an invisible wall. Then they began to move backward, returning to their source. But as they traveled, they changed. The acid became harmless water. The viral weapons became clouds of beneficial bacteria. The Keth ships tried to retreat but found they couldn't move. Their biohulls began to age rapidly. In seconds, ships that had been alive and aggressive became dried husks floating dead in space. But their crews survived. The human technology had somehow separated the living vessels from their occupants, leaving the Keth personnel in escape pods. The entire engagement lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, the Keth battle fleet was gone. Not destroyed, not scattered, simply gone. The only evidence they had ever existed was a field of escape pods containing confused but unharmed Keth soldiers. The human ships remained for exactly 1 hour, then vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Similar scenes played out across 17 systems. Keth fleets that had been unstoppable for months simply ceased to exist when they encountered human forces. The invaders' biological weapons were neutralized, their ships aged to dust, their crews safely deposited in rescue pods. In the Galactic Council's Emergency Command Center, the greatest military minds in the galaxy watched the recordings in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about warfare, about technology, about the balance of power in the galaxy, had been turned upside down in less than a day. "They're not fighting the Keth," observed Admiral Korath Prime. "They're correcting them." "What do you mean?" asked General Thaxon. "Look at the recordings again. The humans aren't using weapons in any sense we understand. They're manipulating reality itself. They turn biological weapons into beneficial substances. They age enemy ships while preserving the crews. It's like they're editing the universe to remove problems." The Secretary General had arrived and now stood watching the displays with the others. "How advanced would a species need to be to do this?" "Beyond our ability to measure," Admiral Korath Prime replied. "We're looking at technology that might as well be magic. They're treating the laws of physics like suggestions." More reports arrived throughout the day. Human fleets had appeared at every major Keth stronghold. But there were no demands, no communications, no negotiations. The humans simply arrived, neutralized any threats, and moved on. The Keth hegemony's response was predictable: panic. Their leaders sent increasingly desperate messages to anyone who would listen. They offered surrenders, truces, territorial concessions. Their messages went unanswered. The humans aren't interested in surrender, General Thaxon realized. They're not fighting a war. They're solving a problem. On the 6th day, the reports stopped coming, not because the fighting had ended, but because there was nothing left to report. The Keth hegemony's military had simply ceased to exist. Their bioweapons had been neutralized. Their poisoned worlds were somehow being cleaned and restored. The most disturbing reports came from Keth homeworlds. The planets weren't being attacked or occupied. Instead, they were being improved. Polluted atmospheres became clean. Damaged ecosystems were restored. The aggressive biological modifications that made the Keth so dangerous were being gently reversed. "They're not conquering the Keth," Admiral Korath Prime said quietly. "They're healing them." In the council chamber, emergency sessions continued around the clock. But now the discussions weren't about fighting the Keth. They were about humanity. "How long have they been watching us?" demanded Counselor Zephyr. His feathered crest had remained flat against his head for days. 15 years of observations," replied the Secretary General. Dr. Chen attended every session, recorded every discussion. "Tactical assessments," General Thaxon said quietly. She wasn't taking notes. She was analyzing our capabilities, our strategies, our weaknesses. The implications sank in slowly. For 15 years, humanity had sat silently in their chamber while the galaxy's leaders revealed their military secrets, their political divisions, their technological limitations. Every debate had been recorded. Every argument had been analyzed. Every weakness had been catalogued. "They know everything about us," Counselor Zephyr whispered. "Our fleet positions, our battle plans, our command structures. We told them everything while they pretended to be primitive observers." The galaxy had dismissed Earth as backward and irrelevant. Now they realized they had been observed, studied, and assessed by a civilization so advanced that it could rewrite reality itself. And that civilization had decided the galaxy needed some corrections. The Keth hegemony fell in 6 days. Not conquered, not defeated, simply dismantled. Their military forces vanished as if they had never existed. Their biological weapons became harmless. Their poisoned worlds were restored to pristine condition. The aggressive species that had terrorized the galaxy for months was gently transformed into something peaceful. On the 7th day, Dr. Sarah Chen returned to the Galactic Council. She walked through the chamber doors at exactly the same time she had for 15 years. She wore the same simple clothes, carried the same primitive tablet, and moved with the same quiet dignity. She took her seat in the observer section, placed her tablet on the desk, and opened it to begin writing. The chamber was full, but absolutely silent. Every delegate stared at the lone human who had returned to her usual place. No one spoke. No one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The Secretary General sat frozen at their podium. They had called this emergency session to discuss the implications of humanity's intervention, but now they found themselves unable to speak. How do you address a representative of a species that can rewrite reality? Dr. Chen's stylus began moving across her tablet screen. The soft scratching sound was unnaturally loud in the complete silence of the chamber. She wrote with the same mechanical precision she had shown for 15 years, as if nothing had changed. Minutes passed. Dr. Chen continued writing. The delegates continued staring. No one seemed willing to break the silence that had settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. Finally, the Secretary General found their voice. The Council recognizes that we are in session." Their words came out as barely more than a whisper. Dr. Chen looked up briefly, nodded politely, and returned to her writing. More silence. The Secretary General looked around the chamber, seeking guidance from senior delegates. Everyone avoided their gaze. No one wanted to be the first to speak to the human. We have received reports about recent events in former Keth territory," the Secretary General continued, their voice growing slightly stronger. Perhaps the Council would benefit from understanding Earth's perspective on these developments." Dr. Chen's stylus paused for a moment. She looked up and met the Secretary General's eyes. "Earth's perspective remains unchanged," she said calmly. "We continue to observe." Her voice was the same as always, quiet, professional, perfectly polite. It carried no threat, no anger, no indication of the awesome power her species had just demonstrated. Counselor Zephyr of the Avian Confederacy rose from his seat on shaking legs. His feathered crest, once proud and erect, remained flattened against his head in a permanent display of submission. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice barely audible, "the Council. We formally request to understand Earth's position on galactic affairs moving forward." Dr. Chen finished writing her current line before looking up. She studied Counselor Zephyr for a moment, her expression showing no emotion about his previous insults. "Earth's position," she said calmly, "is exactly what it has always been. Observation." She returned to her notes. Around the chamber, delegates exchanged confused glances. Observation? after demonstrating technology that could reshape reality itself. However, Dr. Chen continued without looking up, we have recently updated our assessment protocols. We now intervene when we observe actions that threaten the overall stability of galactic civilization. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Every delegate understood the implication. Earth had been watching. Earth had been evaluating, and Earth had found the galaxy's behavior unsatisfactory. General Thaxon stood up slowly. His reptilian features showed deep exhaustion and fear. Dr. Chen, the technology your species demonstrated, the capabilities we witnessed, may we ask about their origin? They were developed during our observation period, Dr. Chen replied without looking up from her tablet. We had a lot of time to think while listening to your debates. She made another note before continuing. 15 years of sessions provided excellent data on galactic threats and defensive requirements. We used that information to develop appropriate responses. The implications hit the delegates like a physical blow. While they had mocked humanity's primitive technology, Earth had been quietly developing capabilities beyond their imagination. While they had laughed at human silence, humanity had been solving problems they couldn't even comprehend. Admiral Korath Prime of the Crystalline Consortium rose to speak. Her crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. The Keth worlds, they've been restored completely. Ecosystems that were poisoned for decades are now flourishing. How is such restoration possible? Molecular reconstruction is a basic application of quantum field manipulation, Dr. Chen replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. We simply returned the damaged systems to their optimal configurations. And the Keth themselves? Admiral Korath Prime pressed. Their aggressive modifications have been corrected? Genetic therapy on a species-wide scale, Dr. Chen explained. We removed the artificial enhancement that made them violently territorial. They retain all their natural abilities but are no longer compelled to attack others. She looked up briefly. We believe in rehabilitation rather than destruction whenever possible. The delegates absorbed this information in stunned silence. Humanity had casually accomplished what the galaxy's best scientists had declared impossible: instant healing of entire worlds and genetic modification of an entire species. The military action was effortless for your forces, observed the Secretary General carefully. Your ships seem to operate beyond known physics. Space-time manipulation is more efficient than conventional weapons, Dr. Chen replied. Rather than destroying enemy forces, we simply edited them out of existence temporarily, then placed them safely in rescue pods. No permanent harm was done. Edited them out of existence, repeated the Secretary General faintly. Reality is more flexible than most species realize, Dr. Chen said. With sufficient understanding of quantum mechanics and dimensional theory, physical laws become suggestions rather than absolute limits. Dr. Chen returned to her writing. The sound of her stylus on the tablet screen was the only noise in the vast chamber. Every delegate sat in silence, trying to process what they had learned. Humanity possessed technology that could rewrite the laws of physics. They could heal entire worlds instantly. They could modify species genetically without harm. They could make enemy fleets simply stop existing. And they had developed all of this while sitting silently in council sessions, dismissed as primitive observers. Dr. Chen, the Secretary General, said eventually, given Earth's capabilities, would humanity consider taking a more active role in galactic affairs? Dr. Chen looked up once more. That depends, she said simply. On what? On whether the galaxy demonstrates that it can function responsibly, Dr. Chen replied. For 15 years, we observed constant warfare, territorial disputes, and the mistreatment of developing species. The Keth crisis was simply the most recent example of galactic instability. She gestured slightly toward the chamber around them. We will continue observing. If galactic civilization proves capable of peaceful coexistence and constructive development, we will remain passive observers. If it continues to generate threats to overall stability, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We trust this information will help the Council make more informed decisions going forward, Dr. Chen concluded. The chamber remained silent. Dr. Chen returned to her tablet, stylus moving across the screen with its familiar rhythm. But now every delegate understood that those notes represented something far more significant than simple record-keeping. They were assessments, evaluations, report cards on galactic civilization's behavior, and humanity was still grading them. The Secretary General eventually called for other business, but no one had anything to say. How do you discuss trade disputes when you've just learned that one of your observers can rewrite reality? How do you argue about territorial boundaries when a species that can edit physics has been quietly watching your every move? Dr. Chen continued writing throughout the session. When delegates spoke, she recorded their words. When they made decisions, she noted the details. When they revealed their thoughts and strategies, she captured everything, just as she had for 15 years. As the session ended, delegates filed out in complete silence. They moved like people leaving a funeral, slowly, carefully, afraid to make sudden movements or loud noises. Dr. Chen packed her tablet with the same methodical care she had always shown. She stood and walked toward the exit, moving with her characteristic quiet dignity. But now every eye in the chamber followed her movement. Every delegate watched the human representative who had revealed the truth about Earth's nature. Humanity had never been the primitive species seeking acceptance from advanced civilizations. They had been the advanced civilization evaluating whether the galaxy deserved their help, and they were still deciding. Dr. Chen reached the chamber doors and paused, just as she had when delivering her final statement 3 days earlier. But this time she didn't turn around. She simply walked through the doors and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The galaxy would continue. The council would keep meeting. Decisions would still need to be made about trade, territory, and the countless other details of civilization.